Welcome to Capitol Preview, a weekly bipartisan discussion with Iowa legislators about the key issues facing our state. Brought to you by Mediacom.
Hi, welcome to another edition of Capitol Preview, a show brought to you by our friends at Mediacom that explores the issues of the state, both senators and House members, of what's going on up on our Hill. This morning's guest is Todd Prichard from Floyd County, District 52, Charles City, and New Hampton. So we welcome Mr. Prichard here this morning, and thanks for being with us.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
This show is not a red meat show. It's just kind of a conversation between you and trying to figure out what's going on up at the Hill for our viewers. The first question I'm going to ask is a pretty important one, Representative, and that is, what is the impact of Medicaid privatization in rural Iowa?
Yeah, well, as you're aware, Governor Branstad privatized Iowa's Medicaid system about 3 years ago, and that affects about 600,000, over 600,000 Iowans are on the Medicaid system. And the people that are on Medicaid, typically the elderly, people with full long-term disabilities, lifelong disabilities, and then children, indigent, families for children. And so, very important program, provides health care for a lot of Iowans, and it was privatized kind of without notice. And other states that have gone to a privatized model did so, maybe they took 3 to 5 years to do it. Iowa did it under Governor Branstad's decision in about 8 months, and it was kind of a dramatic change for a lot of Iowans. Mm-hmm. And since we've had this privatization, it's been particularly difficult for Medicaid providers, so the healthcare service providers, doctors, nurse practitioners, clinicians, therapists, people that transport, like ambulance services. It's been very hard for them to survive because there's been a pattern of deny claims for reimbursement or underpay reimbursement, let alone the experience that the patients are having, where they've had a lot of problems getting approved for services and treatments that many times are necessary. And so this has had a particularly rough effect in rural Iowa. Places like Charles City, my district, where the not getting reimbursed timely, getting claims denied or getting claims reduced, and having to basically fight with a private insurance company, what we call an MCO, to get paid for the services you've provided have really created an economic hardship. And so, examples would be the Floyd County Hospital. It's a Veterans Memorial Hospital. It's publicly run. For the first time in decades, they've had to ask for help from the county because they're not getting reimbursement. And so if you talk to the administration there, about 50% of their fees go unpaid. And a lot of this is due because they're having to fight these MCOs in this privatized system to get paid. And if you're not getting paid for half the work you do, I don't care what business you're in, that makes things tough.
Absolutely.
So
do they have any recourse of getting that money back or not, or is it just gone?
Well, a lot of it they just have to write off because they really don't have the tools to force these companies, to force the MCOs to pay them. And so they're at really kind of a disadvantage. They're in a position of weakness. And what should come to their aid should be the Department of Human Services. It should be the state to be an honest, fair broker as far as, okay, this should be paid, this shouldn't. But the state is really kind of powerless. And I liken this situation a lot to you've got the fox in the hen house.
Right.
And when they aren't accountable to really anybody but themselves, that's a problem. And who's paying the price but hospitals and healthcare providers across the state. So
I'm assuming then, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, that this problem is going to balloon.
It's going to get worse
and pop at some point.
It has in some ways. I mean, a few weeks ago, I think it was earlier this month, maybe 2 weeks ago, United Healthcare, which is one of the 2 MCO providers that Iowa had, announced that they were going to leave the state. They insured and covered about 425,000 Iowans. And with them leaving the state, okay, there's another company coming in, but that causes a lot of turbulence and disturbance for people on these programs. And so I've heard from these people across the state where now they've got to restart with a new case manager. They've got to get it signed up. They've basically got to start from scratch with their networks. Mm-hmm. And that's just disruptive. Mm-hmm. And when it's not working for, I don't really know who this system is working for. It's not working for Iowans. It's not working for patients or doctors. Mm-hmm. It's not working for the privatized companies because they keep leaving. This is the second one that is left now. Right. I don't know who this is working for. And what we have it's disappointing because I think the governor has talked about the need to address the situations, identified the problem, but we haven't seen any real substantive plan forward from the governor's office or from Republicans in the legislature who are controlling both chambers. So something needs to be done.
Stay tuned, right?
Yeah.
Iowa wages have not grown for decades. What does that mean for the hardworking Iowa families?
Well, we're in a unique position. I mean, we have what I would call almost historic low unemployment rates right now, right? I mean, I think Iowa leads the nation. I think we're somewhere in the 2 to 3% of unemployment, and that's great. But at the same time, we need to look at wages. We need to look at what families are taking home in their paychecks, and do they have enough disposable income to do the things that they want to do? Do they have enough income? Not just disposable income, but income to pay their bills and get ahead. And I think you hear a lot of people, what I see in rural Iowa is there's a lot of jobs, but there are a lot of jobs that aren't necessarily what I would call jobs that can support a middle class lifestyle. And so, as Democrats in the House, what we've supported are things like increasing the minimum wage, seeing what we need to do. A lot of employers in my district know that they can't pay the minimum wage of $7.25 to attract anybody. Yeah. But then also looking at not just increasing the minimum wage, but working to increase the median wage as far as what do we need to do to provide those things that bring higher paying jobs to the community. And so we as Democrats were looking a lot as investing in job training, giving people opportunities to advance their skill sets and get, go up the ladder in the amount in their ability to earn and command good wages.
In keeping with the almighty dollar, which we all are chasing, right?
Sure.
Because it makes everything better or worse depending on what the circumstances. Right. What's happening with public school funding these days?
Well, this year school funding can get pretty policy wonky pretty quick in Iowa. Right. But the what's called the SSA or state supplemental aid is the per head funding amount that the state provides, and this year it was an increase of about 2%, which is, compared to the last few years, is better. I think they've been somewhere around 1.5%. I'd have to look for sure, but we've done a little bit better this year. But when you're not keeping up with inflation, we're just over 2%. Inflation's probably closer to 3%, and we have underfunded schools really for so long, where we haven't kept up with inflation for probably the last 5 years or more. Schools are really starting to see that. And the first thing that a school does when it doesn't have the proper funding it needs is it cuts programming. And this happens in my district, this happens across the state. And it happens particularly in districts that aren't seeing a growth in student population. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of areas, a lot of rural areas, like my area, is pretty flat. We're not really growing. We're not really losing the student population. We're kind of flat. And when your funding formula is based on enrollments and you're not growing, and then you're not keeping up with inflation from the state assistance, you're having to cut programs. Maybe you're having to increase property taxes at the local level to do that. And the bottom line is that hurts communities. It hurts students. It hurts opportunities for students. But then it really hurts the community. You look at the towns in my district in North Iowa, the school is the community center. It's the center of gravity for that community.
Absolutely.
And from the sports teams to the fine arts to the plays, we just had last couple of weeks they had Clue was the school play. I mean, that's a big community event. Yeah. And
absolutely,
when those programs are endangered, like the marching band or things, students suffer. There's all sorts of studies that show that that's critical for student success, is those types of programs. But it hurts the community as well. So I mean, not making those investments in the schools has really hurt.
Speaking of heart of the communities, Todd, what can the lawmakers do to revitalize rural Iowa?
I think just what we talked about with education is making those investments.
Right.
We can't manage decline. If you try to manage decline, you're gonna have decline.
Right.
What we need to do is we need to look in ways of innovation and growing rural Iowa, bringing population back. So I think the schools, I think investing, make sure that there's healthcare services available. The opposite direction of what you want to do to attract people to a community is close clinics.
Right.
And that's happened. Healthcare clinics that have been closing. But then also making sure that we are targeted with our entrepreneurial investments. We have the Iowa Department of Economic Development, whose its mission is to grow Iowa's economy. But they make decisions based on where are we going to use state resources to grow, and I think what we need to focus on is on the small entrepreneur, the small business, and that's really the driver of Main Street. It's the driver of these small towns, is to make sure that people that want to start a small shop or business or some sort of manufacturing, that's where the focus is. We don't always need to have the big, we've made this huge facility. That's good, but let's also focus on the people that are doing the small business things, where they're hiring 5, 10, 15 people, and they're bringing jobs to Main Street and to small communities. So,
I agree. What are the priorities? I know we've talked a little bit about, but what are the priorities for the state budget this year?
Well, I guess we'll find out this week. We're going to have a lot of the budget bills come back this week. There's been agreement between the Senate and House leadership. We've talked a little bit about the education funding. The education funding it's usually the first budget bill we do, which is good, because that allows local schools to identify what they have to work with for the upcoming school year. We had the Ag and DNR budget, which is kind of the budget where we do a lot of the work with like water quality issues and Department of Natural Resources projects and things like that. I think as Democrats would like to see more funding for water quality issues. Here in the Des Moines and the Central Iowa region, where there's been a lot of talk about the nitrates in the water supply in the Raccoon and Des Moines rivers. That's something that we as a state need to invest resources in to address and get ahead of and do what we can. We talk with the healthcare budget. There's some, with the healthcare budget, there's some good and there's some bad, but there's a failure to address what the issues that we started off the program with dealing with some of the Medicaid issues and some of the problems that people are facing who are kind of caught in this system that's not working.
Right. Representative, we're about ready to come to an end of this morning's show, but very briefly, how do you think the session went this year?
Well, I think so far, it's been, I think really the final chapter of the session will really tell, this final week will really tell what happens with how history will judge this session, because we can go down some paths with changing the way that we pick judges in Iowa or some of these controversial things, or we can do what's right for Iowa. And this last week, I'm afraid there may be a push to do some things that probably aren't in the best interest with the state. And I think if we can stay focused on what is best for the people, and I think we'll be much better off. So.
Well, thank you tuning in this morning. Our guest has been Todd Prichard. Thank you, Mr. Prichard, for coming from Floyd County, for being on our show. Please stay tuned for another episode of Capitol Preview.